My name is Scott Donovan, and I guess you're here to hear about digital printing, digital textile printing 101. Can I get a show of hands? Is anybody doing digital printing now? Got a few. So the rest of everybody's here to learn about it and figure out what's going on with it. So we'll just dive right into it. What is digital textile printing? And I've kind of summed it up with it's any method of imaging textiles with a digital process. The images can be applied directly to the cloth, directly to the textile itself, or printed to a second or a first substrate and then applied to the textile afterwards. Like I said, the image is generated from the digital file. And these days, this is kind of what digital textile imaging looks like. And to back up a little bit, to give you a little background so I can kind of compare digital and conventional, how many people are familiar with screen printing, flat screen printing shirts? Okay, that's a good show of hands. Anybody with block printing? We all probably did it in elementary school or secondary school. How about rotary screen? So we've got some rotary screen folks. Okay, great. So this is kind of the look and the feel of conventionally printing textiles. And with conventionally printing textiles, we have some limitations, but that went along with the technology as it grew. We have a limited number of colors with conventional printing. If you can think back with the flat screens and the rotary screens, we have a limited size of our graphic elements. In conventional true textile printing, we had a repeat size that was a problem. Commonly with a rotary screen, it was about 24, 25 inches. So you couldn't repeat myself. One thing about conventional printing, it's kind of easy to find. Every town has a screen printer, flat screen printer to do t-shirts. Textile printers are spread throughout the world. Conventional printing has cost-efficient long runs. Hence, that's why we've been doing it for so long. It's good for single image repeats, which is part of the image, just repeated over and over and over. And it has proven manufacturing methods. Digital printing has been around hundreds of years. So the technology that went behind it is pretty much thought out, and we know what's going on with it. So why do we want to do digital textile printing? With the advent of the technology, the print heads, the inks, the machines, we can now realize shorter runs, quicker time to market. We can do unlimited colors. And we'll get to the color issue and the color thing in a bit. We have an open design, and by open design, I mean we can still do those small repeats. We can also do images like the one behind us at the snack point, which are large, single repeat. We get into feet, measuring feet of the repeat instead of inches. We're able to produce one-offs. Digital file goes in through the rip, gets ripped, gets put on the digital printer. We're doing a one single repeat or a strike-off. Think back to the rotary print machine. We'd have to make, if it was an 8-color job, we'd have to separate the art into 8 colors. We'd have to make 8 rotary screens, put those rotary screens onto a proof press or a print range, register them, fill them with dye, put the squeegees in, print that 1 yard. Not too cost effective. We have variable designs. We can easily set up this printer so that we can print colorway after colorway with different colors in it. And all that's taken care of on the front end with the rip and in the software. In most cases, our finished product can be the same as conventional printing. And we have a cost factor. To do that strike-off conventionally, you're looking 6 to 8 weeks, a few $1,000s, a few €1,000. On the digital printer, it's just a matter of the time in the rip, working with the digital file, and the cost of the materials for that in the printer, which is $100 versus several $1,000s. We also have the cost factor of DTP of running it in production, which is if you boil down digital textile printing as it compares to conventional printing, the first thing we found 20 years ago when this technology first surfaced was conventional printers had a really hard time wrapping their head around that a liter of ink costs $300. This was 20 years ago. Their print paste was pennies per liter. So the first thing we got into consumables early on in the process was, I can't afford that because the consumable's too much. The cost of consumables have dropped rapidly, under 60, 70% of what they were 20 years ago. The speeds have greatly improved. So now the conventional printers are starting to say, hey, this is kind of looking attractive. And once you factor in your downtime and your make readies on a conventional machine, you can see why digital textile printing is becoming popular. So what does digital textile printing look like? We all walk around, we see ovals that have digital units on it. We see roll-to-roll machines, we see DTG machines. So on the DTG side, this is a digital textile printing shop. It's pretty easy. We have our digital textile printer over here, which is putting images onto a finished garment. We have a couple small heat press or buck presses that'll take that and they will cure the pre-treatment on there, or they'll cure the ink once you put it on there. Digital textile, or DTG, digital garment, is actually pigment printing onto mostly cotton for t-shirts, but you can go on to polyester and poly-cotton blends. And you notice in that industry, there's always a pre-treatment function going on with it. They've kind of learned from the roll-to-roll industry that to do pigments correctly, you need to pre-treat the fabric. Then we move up from a DTG printer into small boutique printer doing roll-to-roll fabric, usually a single printer or two printers. In an office environment, they'll have some post-finishing machines here, usually a heat calendar or a small steamer. But you know, this now with the advent of the technology, this can go and mostly goes into office environments. Most of the clients that I work with, I'd say 50 or 60%, they're working in the next office over. They're in office parks, office buildings. So it brought digital textile printing into office environments. We move up into small production shops. And here you'll see more of an industrial setting, and you'll start to see banks of printers set up. And banks of printers set up just mean more capacity, more meters or yards per hour. You still see that they're still in fairly office environment type settings. The industrial setting doesn't come into play until we get to industrial printers. So here the machines are much larger. They won't fit in the office next door. They're in large facilities like this that have air handling and environmental air conditioning taken into effect. You see larger printers. You see finishing equipment that mirrors conventional printing now. And that's because with the industrial printers printing 30, 35 yards a minute, or meters a minute, linear meters a minute, the material handling has to keep up with it. So when you have a printer that fast, now you're into an industrial setting, you're gonna have forklifts moving material around you. You're gonna have a lot of pre and post finishing equipment to keep up with those printers. It's not your small 100-yard roll of fabric anymore. You've moved up to this game. So people always ask me, what fiber types can I print with digital textile printing? 20 years ago, I would have kind of given you the same answer. And these have fall in and out of flavor as the industry progressed. But we can print cotton, wool, silk, polyester, and nylons, just like we can conventionally printing. The different fiber types use different print processes. And this is pretty important if you're getting into digital textile printing, is because you have to match your dye up to your pigment up to your fiber type. Cotton, you'll hear a lot out on the shop floor now or the show floor about pigment printing. They have the new development in resins and binder technologies and vehicles for the ink over the last 2 years have allowed us now to put that ink through an inkjet printer, through an inkjet head. Silk, wool, or nylon, pigment or acid dyes, polyester, pigment or disperse. If you're looking for digital textile printing, if you're doing a project, ask your printers that you run into, that you're planning on using, what type of dye they use. Then you can match up your product to that. And we're going to go over this in detail for the next couple of slides. And I put this in there because for 20 years I've been going to presentations and giving presentations, and when this comes up, everybody brings out their pencil and starts writing. And so we'll go over each one and we'll summarize it also. So for pigment printing, we have water-based pigments now. The vehicle in the ink is an acrylic binder. They found that can flow through the print head, keep the print heads open. Pigment printing is an opaque printing method, this is a new development for digital textile printing, is we're printing color on top of the fiber, so we're applying it like paint. The other dye types we'll go over. So it's an opaque method. Post-treatment is a heated calendar or a flatbed press. And pre-treated fabric yields the best results. If you can use untreated fabric, I've seen about 10% of them work fairly well as far as color rendition. What you don't get out of the fabric, if it's not pre-treated, you don't get any rub fastness, you don't get any durability, you don't get any wash fastness. So the first thing I do when I get samples of pigment printing is I go home and I put them in the washer, and I see how much dye or colors left on top of them when I get them back out. And here we got a picture of some home decks, some sheeting, and a DTG printer. Reactive dye, another way to print cotton, silk, and wool. In this scenario, the dye during the post-finishing process is absorbed into the fiber of the textile. So as opposed to pigments, remember we are printing on top. When you print with reactive dyes, you're actually printing your CMYK mix, and when it blooms into a color and rolls into the fabric. Excellent wash fastness, rub fastness. Uses a pre-treated fabric. I'm not going to say always, because someone will bring a fabric and prove me wrong on that. But for the most part, it's a pre-treated fabric. And the post-finishing is running through a steamer to bloom the dye into the fiber and to wash the excess dye off afterwards. Acid dye, silk, wool, and nylons, same as reactives. It's rolled into the fiber, it's locked into the fiber. Pre-treated fabric in post-finishing, just like reactives. But the same type of outcome is possible. If you're doing a conventional printing on a silk for scarves and ties, you can get that same look and feel from a digital print. Disperse dye. Disperse dye for polyesters. We can use a transfer method or a direct method to print. The transfer method doesn't require pre-treatment of the fabric or post-treatment. This is commonly referred to as transfer dye sublimation for what you're hearing out on the show floor. That kind of opens up our fabric usage if you're a small printer and you're using dye sublimation to using any type of polyester that's on the market. You don't have to put any added cost into the fabric, pre-treating it or post-treating it. There's the direct method, pre-treatment 95% of the time. The disperse direct, and what's the difference between the disperse direct and the disperse transfer dye? Mostly the same thing. The vehicle in the direct is clear, and in the transfer it has a color to it. The clear coating for direct was developed because we were taking digital disperse dye and printing it onto fabric. We were heat calendaring it to get the color to bloom. The color would show, but there was still 10-15% of the dye left on there. And it always happened is you'd make a trade show, a table cover for a trade show, and someone would come up with a glass and set it on there, and the glass would sweat, and the water turns this dye kind of a brown color. And as soon as they picked up the glass, the customer would go, "My table cover has a big brown spot on it." So the clear carrier was developed for this end of printing. So here's our summary. This is your Kodak moment. So everybody got it? It's kind of funny. It's like every time something like this, everybody gets one going. This just kind of sums up what we just talked about with the disperse, the transfer, the pigment, the reactive, and the acid dyes. This is kind of an interesting thing to keep in mind. I find printers tell this to their clients, but if you can remember that all textile printing require pre-treatment and a post-treatment to perform and act just like a conventionally printed fabric, except the transfer sublimated polyester. So if you're out there and you're working with a printer and you're doing some pigment printing or some reactive printing, and they tell you they don't have to pre-treat or post-treat fabric, something's going on with that. So it's something you need to investigate. Or if they're giving you a print cost to print direct onto the fabric, if they're not factoring in the pre-treatment or the post-treatment, there's another issue that you're gonna get a surprise with at the end. So with digital textile printing these days, when it first reared its head in the mid to late 90s, we thought we were printing fast at 30 square feet an hour. 30 square feet an hour was blinding fast. So to boil that down, I do it in yards, being from the States, there's 15 square feet in a yard. So 2 yards an hour. We thought was, we have the gas put on. As you can see from the chart here, if you look at the industrial side of things these days, you're up around 1,500 square meters an hour. Down in what I call the production stage, you're at about 150, 175 square meters an hour. And down at entry level, and it's just a little bump, but the entry level is probably 90% of the number of printers out there on the entry level, they're around 200, 250 square feet an hour. So it looks like it's a really large gap here. It is from entry level to industrial, but the price of the entry level, if you take, for an example, transfer sublimation process, you're looking about $25,000 for a printer, and for a good heat calendar, you're looking at another $30,000 for an entry level. So you're looking at 55,000 euros or dollars these days with the conversion rate down there for an entry level. And up here, you're looking at $1.5 million just for the printer. And that's no auxiliary, primary, or secondary equipment with it. So the speeds are scaled, but so is the price tag for entry. So you're thinking about adding digital printed textiles to your product line. Here's some questions to ask your printer manufacturer or your consumable folks that are involved. First type is what I've asked people when I was selling equipment is, what are you trying to make? If they told me cycling jerseys, I knew they were polyester. If they told me home deck, I knew they were probably cotton-based. If they told me they were doing shower curtains or something like that, you might be cotton, probably more polyester-based. If you're gonna make women's scarves, you got polyester or silk-based products. So it kind of told me which way they need to learn which dye set to use, and that'll also tell your printer manufacturer what type of solution you need. Next question you're going to ask, once you figure out what type of dye you're going to print and what type of fabric that goes on, is you're going to ask how much production capacity will you need? And going back to the other graph with the industrial versus the entry level, if you need 600 square feet an hour of production, you could either go on the industrial end at 1,500, or you could just start stacking those entry-level printers. Remember back to the slide with the production shop, we just started seeing banks of printers put in. Some manufacturers will go that route. If you go that route, instead of putting in one fast machine, you have a lot of redundancy. Digital printers are not really mass-produced these days, so you got to figure on some downtime. And if a printer goes down and you still have client commitments to make, if you have redundancy, you can kind of fill in that need as you go along. What other type of infrastructure do you have in place? If you're currently a dye sub house, you have a heat calendar. If you want to print cotton, which is going pigments, you need another printer for that, but you have the post-finishing device already in-house. If you have none of that in-house, you might want to think on where you want to start based on that curve, whether it's entry-level, industrial, or production level. The last thing is, what is your budget? We talked about that a little bit with, on the production side, anywhere from starting out 50,000 up to $1.5 million. So just some things to think about as you're exploring the world out here of textile printing. You're going to hear a lot of solutions from a lot of different people. So it's just some things to keep in mind.